Mr. Chairman, I think we ought to have this loudmouth removed.
This week has seen contention as confirmation hearings for Judge Brett Kavanaugh got underway, with Democrats and protesters alike hoping to stall the proceedings. Democrat Senator Cory Booker said he's prepared to lose his seat in the Senate over the hearings. One of the biggest issues, the lawyer for George W. Bush released a cache of documents related to Kavanaugh's time serving in the Bush White House just hours before the hearings began. But for Democrats, those documents are not enough.
90% is missing right now. Just common sense says we should have access to thoroughly evaluate this person.
The more than 500,000 pages of documents turned into this committee is more than the number of pages we've received for the last 5 Supreme Court nominees combined.
Democrats are also outraged over the lack of public access to those documents and broke Senate rules and released them on their own. Republicans calling the move a political stunt to interfere with Kavanaugh's nomination and making clear the documents in question had actually already been cleared for release, and called out those across the aisle.
Running for president is no excuse for violating the rules of the Senate.
And this moment from the hearings going viral this week when Kavanaugh refused to shake the hand of the father of a Parkland shooting victim. Although Senator Hatch's office confirmed the judge didn't hear the man introduce himself and didn't know who he was. Hearings ended Friday. Now we wait for the vote, which Republicans hope to have done before the October Supreme Court session begins. With us this morning, attorney Michelle Quist and University of Utah law professor RonNell Andersen-Jones. Good morning. Thank you both for being here.
You're welcome. Good to be here.
Quite a week. What'd you think of it?
It was amazing. It was a circus. It was good TV, and it was a little depressing all at the same time.
One thing we heard was the Democrats were complaining they didn't have enough information. The Republicans barked back that they had plenty. Yeah. Who won out in that? And what did that have to do with the judge that was sitting over in the seat?
I think it's a distraction. I think neither party won. I mean, obviously, you know, they're asking for the past reports from him, his work in the executive office. They know they have his opinions. They know how he's going to rule on you know, certain issues. The thing is, a judge isn't red and blue. Or at least he's not supposed to be. A judge isn't an issue, you know, nothing special. A judge is neutral until you have the case in front of him and you apply the law to the facts. That's what we want to know, is can they do that?
The court's supposed to be nonpartisan. And you've studied the court and the candidates or nominees for a long, long time. It is everything but nonpartisan now, isn't it? How come?
Certainly the confirmation proceedings over time, if you sort of track the history of them, you can see that they started out in a really quite nonpartisan way. And even well into the maybe 1980s, we saw a nonpartisan, it was the one place where the senators sort of came together in a place where they were collegial, and it was a meritocracy, the sort of to the victor went the spoils. It was understood that although we wished that our party was in control, we aren't, and so we cast the vote and we look at the merits. That has changed, and it's changed markedly in recent years, and certainly we're now to a place where the partisanship and the sort of taking advantage of the moment to speak to one's base rather than to speak to the candidate before you is certainly the new norm.
It seemed like that was in all the questions. The question was for everyone to see how smart I am, and then there'll be a tiny bit for Judge Kavanaugh to answer, and that was from all sides. But this argument over the paperwork, how much is enough to judge, or to get to know how a judge thinks? That seemed to be the ongoing debate. The one side, we don't have enough information about this guy, and the Republicans saying, you got enough.
Yeah, I think this is an interesting thing. I talked to some scholars who have tracked Supreme Court confirmation proceedings over the years, and I asked them, you know, how much documentation has been produced, and how does this compare to past confirmation proceedings? And one of the things that's really interesting to me is that even the people who think about this the very most, the people who do, you know, deep dive empirical scholarship into this, can't really answer that question, because the truth is that documentation has not really been an issue in the past. And I think this goes to our larger point about the politics and the partisanship that's really infected the proceedings. We don't have these kinds of fights that we can turn to in the past to say how many pages is enough or how many pages isn't enough. And in truth, I think a lot of the documentation fight that we saw this past week was not really about documentation. It was about timing and it was about procedure. So one side wanted the timing to be dragged out longer.
After the midterms,
sure,
if they could.
Right. Republicans have every incentive to declare the political win by having this all said and done by the time that the court goes back into session. And they have every incentive not to have more voluminous information from a time period when this candidate really was working as a very partisan actor in the executive branch. And so, and the Democrats have the exact opposite incentives to hold off until the midterms to try to galvanize their base in interesting ways.
Try to get more votes in the Senate by winning some Senate races and things. Well, Michelle,
Right.
watching all of this play out, is this really just what it sounds like when one party is about to lose the court as opposed to another party who's about to get it?
It is. I mean, there's a little of that. There's also bitterness from the Merrick Garland issue and the fact that he didn't get a hearing. There's a lot of bitterness from that. But, you know, it doesn't really matter who the nominee would have been. One party will always be just as against whoever the nominee is.
Seems like that's just going to be how it is.
I mean, Judge Kavanaugh has, you know, honorifics from everyone, and he's, you know, he's well respected from liberals and conservatives, and it's just the way it is now.
And a lot of these senators who were grilling him had actually voted for him for his current post, but now that it's a bigger post, it's like, well, now he's the worst possible candidate ever. It's hard for a viewer to go, which way should I think here?
Right, and to have faith in the process, because the process looks like it's just for show.
Would either one of you like to sit in that seat and be grilled by that group of people for 4 days?
I think RonNell would. I think she would be great at it.
Would you like it?
I would say too much of my mind. That wouldn't go well.
Say, look, let us ask the questions here.
Yeah,
You know,
exactly.
I think the process is fascinating and awkward and tough to watch, and at the same time, it's how we do it.
Yeah, there's no one who's on deck for the possibility of a federal judgeship of any sort, let alone a position on the U.S. Supreme Court, who is unaware that this would be the process that they would face. And in fact, the email exchanges that have been produced show that Brett Kavanaugh was thinking about this a decade or a decade and a half ago, right? He, in fact, interestingly, a lot of the documentation is documentation of him advising the Bush administration on their own judicial nominees and talking about the sorts of documentation that they should or should not make available, or the kinds of comments that they should or should not make. It's just a process that has compounded itself over time, and as Michelle said, has gotten even more divisive in ways that I think are troublesome to folks on both sides of the aisle.
I grilled steaks with my brothers this week, and Judge Kavanaugh was more well done than my steaks by the time we got to Friday.
But still, the best answer is no answer.
Yeah.
You know, and everybody expects it, and still they give the 25-minute speech, and what's he going to say?
Michelle, RonNell, thank you very much.
You're welcome.
Have a great
Good to
rest
be
of your
here.
weekend.